Wonderful. Now we're on. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And we'll be starting this webinar, How to Organize User Engagement, the Smalls User Engagement Plan Explained. So in a nutshell, I think co-creation for the last 2 years now in this project has been an integral part of the Shared Mobility for All project. As we work with new target groups, we have little knowledge about. And very quickly, when we started the project, we have realized that properly implementing co-creation is more difficult than what we actually thought. So that's where we have thus collectively created something that we call the user engagement plan to organize and try to plan co-creation. And we've used this approach that we're going to present you during this webinar within 11 pilot projects across the North Sea region in Europe. And today we'll present you this plan, and we'll have different speakers to show you a lot of different insights on how this plan has been used and what has been the reality of co-creation within some of those pilots. But first, good for you to know that this webinar is the second webinar of a series. We've had a first one before, more on the theoretical concepts related to co-creation and our target groups. You can find it already online on YouTube. And we will also upload this second webinar and this recording to the Impact channel on YouTube. First things first, we have a lot of people with us today to speak. All of them are actively contributing to the small project. And we're also happy to have with us Dr. Mitzi Waltz, which is sort of our outsider, I would say, today, to give us a fresh perspective on the work that we've been doing and your approach to co-creation. That let's give first a bit of some time for all of you to introduce yourself, and maybe let's start with you, Mitzi.
Sure. I'm a disability studies researcher with a specialism in autism, and I've worked on a really wide variety of projects with neurodiverse and other disabled service users, patients, students, citizens. The role matters, right? And currently, I'm a docent at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, where I'm based at the Athena Institute, which does a lot of work with co-creation. But previously, I worked in the UK and the US.
Thank you so much, and very happy to have you with us today. Next, maybe Essen. So we'll have three speakers from three different pilot projects. So I have another slide as well that will introduce the pilots that they're doing as part of the Shared Mobility for All project. So maybe let's start with Essen, if you would like to introduce yourself, your organization, and maybe as well then the pilot projects you're working on.
Thank you so much, Sami, and hello everyone. So my name is Essen. I work for since almost 6 years for a Belgian NGO called Impact. We are a shared mobility provider, but we also work a lot on, lobbying, policy influencing, and innovation through European projects. And one of them is a small project. And my expertise lies mainly on accessibility, co-creation, youth participation, and setting up Flemish campaigns with some of the participants here today. I see some familiar faces. So, and the pilot that we are working on in the small project is related to our Mobitwin service, which is an on-demand transport service for the elderly people and people with physical impairments in Belgium, where voluntary drivers provide a transport service with a private car for these people for functional rights, for daily tasks like going to the grocery, going to the doctor, going to the pharmacy, etc. And we are experimenting with recruiting new volunteers through co-creation with some of our Mobitwin desks in two of our Mobitwin desks founders. That's it.
Thank you so much, Essen. Let's move on then, or I'll go back to Sar as well. Let's stay in Belgium. Sar, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Saj. I work at the Fietsambassade in Ghent, and I'm coordinator of the Fietstaxi. And we drive people with reduced mobility with our rickshaws, like you see on the picture, and a wheelchair bike to their destination in the city of Ghent. So it's a bit like Moby Twin, but then only in the city of Ghent and with bikes instead of cars. So most of our rides are functional rides. So we drive people to home, from their home to the doctor, groceries, etc. All our passengers are people with reduced mobility, and all our bikers are volunteers, which is very important. It's a very diverse mix of newcomers, refugees, but also retired people. And to give you some data, we had in last year, we had 8,200 rides, and we did this with 92 volunteers.
Impressive numbers. Thank you, Sar. Good to see as well, not just people, right, but also dogs or other animals sometimes also accompanying your passengers. So that's also nice to see. Let's continue then maybe with Asa. I'll go back to the previous slide so we can see you.
Yes, hello. My name is, well, in Swedish is Åsa, a bit difficult for you. So Asa is perfectly fine. I'm a landscape architect in the municipality of Varberg, which is a small coastal city on the west coast of Sweden. It's about an hour south of Gothenburg with train. And in our municipality, I work with my colleagues, that's from the traffic department, and we're studying our existing shared mobility system that we have with regular bikes, and to see if we can maybe complement that in a way so that it's more accessible for elderly people and also PRMs with different physical mobility problems. So that's what we try to do.
Thank you so much, Waza. I'm very sorry that I haven't been pronouncing your name very well the past times, so I'll try to improve.
Don't worry.
And last but not least, person who will also facilitate the presentation of this user engagement plan with me today, Maite de Winter, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Maite. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the geography department at Ghent University. And I'm involved in SMAL as more like the knowledge partner, together with some other colleagues of the VU Amsterdam. And for now, we have mainly been working on the co-creation framework within SMAL, but also the user engagement plan and also the impact evaluation.
Thank you very much, Maite. And myself, for those who do not know me, I'm Sami Youngstem. I work as a mobility consultant at PAX, a European innovation consultancy. I'm working mostly on inclusive mobility projects across Europe with different cities, foundations, and other organizations. And I have the pleasure to work with Impact and the entire consortium to coordinate this project with them. So yeah, now that introductions are all made, let's talk a little bit about the format of this webinar, which is we try to make something a little bit more original to go through a plan, right? It's not an easy task to just drive you through a plan. And so we'll go through three different moments, talking about what is actually a user engagement plan, why did we create that, what are the 5 different phases of that plan, and basically how to best use that plan. And my role together with Maite will be to drive you from all those different phases and segments of this plan. And as we go through the plan, you will actually see some images popping up from our 4 different speakers that will give you a lot of different insights from their day-to-day experience with co-creation and with the plan. So yeah, let's go for the ride then. And just for you to know, you're already able now to download this plan on our websites. You will find a lot of different templates, different testimonials from partners, and also the examples of the user engagement plans that our partners have done as part of the project. But first, some last introduction before we deep dive to this user engagement plan. So we've introduced the speakers, we've introduced the format of this webinar, but we haven't introduced SMAL, this European project, which stands for Shared Mobility for All, that has been going on for more than 2 years. So I would like to ask again, Esen, to take a stand and explain us a bit more about what is SMAL and what are we doing.
Thank you, Sami. So what is small, or more specifically, who is behind small? We are a consortium. If you can go to the next slide, we are a consortium of knowledge partners, cities, and shared mobility providers over in Europe. And we are working on this project called Small since October 2022, and it will last until October 2026. So we have 4 time to make sure that we can co-create more accessible shared mobility solutions for people with reduced mobility. So what do we mean, or how do we want to do this co-creation? When you go to the next slide, there are several aspects and steps of co-creation, and my colleagues will tell you more about it later on. But in general, or very simply explained, we want to first of all make sure we understand the needs of those people with reduced mobility that we are talking about. And with understanding, I'm not only saying like consulting them, but actually also involving them in every phase of creating this inclusive, accessible shared mobility solution. And another aspect is testing those solutions together with the people. And we are doing this through our pilots that we also just pitched with some of our pilot partners also here speaking today. And based on all of the input from both understanding the needs and testing the new solutions, we want to craft new policies that local authorities or other authorities can use if they want to work on accessible shared mobility. If you can go to the next slide, accessible shared mobility, how we want to do that, or how we actually want to test that shared mobility within the small project. We are focusing on 3 characteristics of shared mobility. First of all, the multimodal aspect, where we want to experiment with more adapted vehicles. For example, the rickshaw that Sarah just mentioned, or other kind of adapted cars, for example. And then digital solutions, shared mobility, and cannot be like, you can't think of shared mobility without thinking of digitalization. It is one of the main characteristics of shared mobility, but at the same time, also one of the main challenges that people with reduced mobility experience when they think about shared mobility. So we work on that within some of our pilots, and then the characteristics that I think that is also very valuable, but that people don't know or don't link to shared mobility enough yet, volunteering schemes. Because when we talk about people with reduced mobility, the people aspect, the human aspect is very important, and working with volunteers can be a major component that can help people get access to shared mobility, and also make them able to use those solutions in a comfortable and safe way. And if you can go to the next slide, who are these people with reduced mobility? And I'm sure when I say this word, people with reduced mobility, you already have a vision in your head, probably someone in a wheelchair. But when you actually think about it, there are a lot of people that can be with reduced mobility. Even me, myself, someone who is a young adult, able-bodied, anytime, the moment I have a child by my hand, my transport needs change. But that doesn't mean that I don't need transport. And on the contrary, I still need it. And all of those people, all of those groups, people with reduced mobility, they also need transport and sustainable mobility. So through Small, we want to make sure that we actually clarify those groups, bring them in the picture, and also make sure that we can provide their needs for sustainable mobility. If you can go to the next slide, but what we can see, what we also hear often is that people with reduced mobility are considered as like this niche group. While when you look at the numbers, they are with a lot. I mean, we are with a lot. And it can be really like so diverse, like diversity within the diversity. So just making sure that you know how diverse the group is and how much or the amount of people that are actually with reduced mobility, that can be already a very eye-opening thing for not only authorities, but for example, also shared mobility operators, seeing that there is actually value in making sure that those people also have access to shared mobility. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. And like I said, it's a very diverse group, but we have to make sure within the small project that we have some kind of focus. Because if we want to focus on everyone, then we were afraid that we wouldn't be able to actually help anyone. So we decided to focus on 3 groups, children and families, the elderly or seniors, and people with physical impairments. And as I said, also within these groups, we are aware of the fact that there is a major diversity. You can at the same time be an elderly person who has a child, a grandchild, who might be in a wheelchair, for example. So all these groups, all these profiles can also be intertwined. So we are aware of that, and we are also working internally on how we can make sure that we take that complexity into consideration. If we can go to the next slide. And we don't only do co-creation with end users, but we also do co-creation with local authorities and shared mobility operators. Because if we want to make sure that these solutions are accessible, we have to make sure that we understand also the needs and the challenges that that cities and operators experience, or even designers. Bring those 2 or 3 groups together, so they can maybe help each other solve their issues. So the service that we can provide to people with reduced mobility can also be more optimized. And what we do is we do that through roundtables, a yearly event, and every roundtable is summarized in an insight paper. We actually recently launched the 2nd edition. You can find it on the website, or if you just scan the QR code. And yeah, please feel free to contact us if you have any remarks or questions on this. But this is not our only project output. We have been outputting a lot of things. Our partners have been working very hard on summarizing everything that we are doing. And you can find it on our platform called sharedmobilityforall.eu. And yeah, if you want to work together, collaborate, please feel free to reach out. We're very nice and accessible people. That's it.
Thank you very much, Esen, and it is true. And a lot of outputs that you'll be able to find on the platform. But I would say let's do that after the webinar, and let's now focus on one of the first output that we released as a project about a year ago, which is the small user engagement plan. So first thing that I wanted to discuss with you is first selling you co-creation. Why should you actually include co-creation? To what degree should you actually use co-creation within your mobility project? I'm sure there are many project managers in this call that are about to start a project where they would like to use co-creations or so on. So let's think about a bit the why and the what we can co-create. And I have for you 3 very concrete examples. The first one on the left is an example I received from a good friend, Ralph Brand, from the consultancy of Ruprecht, mentioning this example of a municipality that built a cycling lane to get more children to go to school by bikes. And it was almost not used. And the city had like that there's a problem about that. And as part of their co-creation process, during their evaluation with children, they actually realized that there was one scary dog that was on the way. And that was actually one of the main reasons why the cycling lane was not used. So you'll actually discover insights that you would have never thought of, right, with co-creation. Then the second thing is you will anticipate future challenges. In our project Small, there was one project partner, the capital region of Denmark, who worked with elderly people to find out about their shared mobility needs. And actually quickly identify through those sessions that the lack of private insurance for the elderlies would be a major barrier for shared vehicles. And that was actually one big problem, one big challenge that thankfully was identified early on before being able to launch the project. So you will anticipate future challenges by early on as well, including different people within your co-creation process. And finally, in the Fitz Taxi project led by Sar today in the call, it was also mentioned that most of the promotion of the Fitz Taxi services was actually done by word of mouth, right? These aspects of co-dissemination. So it's not just about doing traditional marketing or ways to approach communities, also involving the end users within that aspects of co-creation can be very powerful to increase your project's impact, your project's communication. So I hope now, those are 3 examples, and I could really give you many more, but I hope now you're sold on co-creation. But let's now see, what can you actually co-create? What are the aspects of a project that you can co-create? And here again, I just wanted to take a very concrete example, the Fitz Taxi services that we just discussed about. So there are 5 different aspects that you can co-create. The first one is co-identify. And within these sections, you can really think about, do we understand your mobility challenge well? Those are our ideas make sense, right? Coming up with an idea and making sure that we actually align with the perspectives of the end users, right? What are all the different aspects that we should consider? Who should we work with? Those are some of the questions that you can answer within the first part of a project. Then when your idea starts to mature, that you're sure that you're getting into the right direction, you can actually move on to more of the co-development phase of co-creation. In this example, we can think about what vehicles should we pick for our pilots? How can we make them more comfortable, right? So you're actually co-developing with your end users and different stakeholders the projects that you're building. And after that, be able, for example, to launch it. Once it's up and running, we move to a phase that is called the co-implementation phase. So it's actually the moment where you're running the project. And for example, here we could think about who could operate the service with us. Can we actually get volunteers or different people to help us with the implementation of the project, which is the case for the FITS taxi service that works mainly with volunteers. Once the project is up and running and we get insights about the project, it's really important to evaluate it. And here, this is the aspects of co-evaluation. Is the project creating the impact we want? Is it working? What could we actually improve? And there's several co-evaluation sessions that you can organize along the way to make sure that your project improves over the time. And finally, the last part, which is for me a bit the new one that I discovered when started this project, or I was not necessarily aware of, is the co-dissemination parts. Can we actually work with different people so that we spread the knowledge and the awareness about the project and the service within the different communities? So here you can pick who can be ambassador for our project, how can they share these projects among their communities. So those are the 5 different aspects of co-creation. Doesn't really matter what you're doing, whether it fits one phase or another. At least it gives you a wide spectrum of all the things that you can work on within a project through co-creation. And now that we know what to co-create, let's see how we can strategically think and organize this process through the user engagement plan. And so the user engagement plan, it should actually help you to structure the following 5 questions. The first one, why? You should explain the motivations and the learning objectives of your team in doing co-creation. Then you should think about the what, no? Define what is influenceable for co-creation, and define with the steps that we had before, what are the different co-creation phases and steps that you want to use within your project. Then who? Identify the relevant target groups, so the end users that will be the recipient of your project, and the stakeholders, the different partners and organizations you're going to work with and engage with as part of your process. Then there's the when. Define actually a timeline of involvement for your pilot project with a lot of different milestones, a lot of different events, and so on. And finally, very important, the how. Thinking about the different facilitation formats that you will use in your engagement events. And so to answer all those 5 questions, you will see as part of the plan, which is divided into 5 different steps, those 5 different steps: scoping your co-creation, identifying your partner, preparing your engagement, maintaining relationships, and plan resources. And we're going to go through those 5 different steps together now. But before that, so we've all understood now, right, that the goal of the user engagement plan is really to prepare and strategize for your co-creation process, which may last a year, 2 years in some cases, depending on your project. So I would like actually to bring our first speaker directly to these conversations with a not so easy question, maybe. What is actually a good preparation for a co-creation process? What is this?
Well, I think I'll start with what I think is the most important step all along the way, which is include people from your target group as co-researchers right from the start. And it's great if they're actually literally part of your team, not people your team reaches out to, but people who are hired by your organization, who are attached to you. In the Netherlands, we're required to show that we have consulted with disabled people before submitting a disability-related funding proposal to our biggest national funder. But that's not really good enough because consultation, when disabled people are actually part of your research team, you can avoid so many mistakes. While you're preparing, so you're in that first 1 or 2 stages, work with your disabled co-researchers to think about what kind of support they and other people like them might need to participate. So this kind of sets things on the right footing right from the beginning. So that includes thinking about any recruitment materials that you're going to create, or how are you going to set up a discussion session for that pre-planning part? Is the language on the right level, for example? as well as helping you to plan your co-creation sessions and the activities that you're going to do in them.
Very interesting. Could you tell us more, or give us maybe a bit more example on this? I really like the perspective on bringing them in your team as co-researchers, because indeed I think from what we have experienced and what we have seen, you always have like the team from the municipality or team from an operator that leads the project and consults, and there's a sort of back and forth, right? How is this integration sort of looking like?
I think it's always really tricky, because when we look at the people who are around us in professional teams, it tends to be people who are just like us. The difference really is that when you have people on your team, if you've actually deliberately recruited, for instance, you're forming a team, you're, building a team, that even your ideas about what's needed are changing right from the start, because they'll tell you when you're making assumptions. They'll tell you about their lives, and their lives can be quite different from the lives that we lead and where their priorities are. They will alert you to things that are based on assumptions, things like the idea that everybody is online and everybody has a smartphone. And they'll go, oh, well, lots of my friends don't. So maybe if that's the thing you were thinking of doing for your outreach, is you're going to put it on Facebook or on WhatsApp groups, this might not be reaching the people that you want. Or they will be challenging you on really simple things that you might not have thought of. And I'll give you an example. I've run projects where we're looking for a space to have our very first meeting or two. And it's really easy for me to get a space at the university. It doesn't cost anything. All I have to do is call my friend and, they'll set up a room. And I think it looks nice. It's pretty, and it's even well served by public transport. But there are a lot of people who would feel really uncomfortable coming onto a university campus because they never had a chance to go to university. They don't see anyone there who looks like them. And there may also be accessibility issues that we've never thought of. I know about them because I work on accessibility projects here, and there are lots of them, because universities have the assumption that they're dealing with young, able-bodied people. So there are doors that people can't push, all of that. When you're working with somebody who themselves has a mobility limitation, they're often really aware of those issues, and they'll suggest places. They've also got contacts you haven't got. So it makes a real difference having them right there with you when you're first having those initial discussions about your project.
Mm-hmm. Very good points. I think to wrap up, I would even say it's quickly being able to break hypotheses, right, and assumptions, and trying to get into the reality of the target groups you're dealing with, right? And this as early as possible. And obviously, if you have the right person is in your team, it makes it much easier.
And we want to spend our time solving the right problems.
Mm-hmm.
And the only people who know what those problems are the ones who are facing them.
So, thank you so much. It's a very good start, very good introductions to where we're going. So moving on then, I would say to the first phase, which is scoping your co-creation as part of your user engagement plan and defining the why and the what you want to co-create. So one of the first things that we ask within this plan, and it sounds really obvious, isn't it? But it's often the most undervalued part of the preparation, is why do you actually need co-creation? Things that I've heard a lot from a lot of people would be, we want people to feel more connected to the project so that they become users. So it's to say, if we actually integrate them in the preparations, they will become users. And that's always the same sort of line as well that we use. But I think as part of this project, we've learned that there's just a lot of different reasons, and you have to be able to write them and think about it and admit things that you know, things and that you don't know, right? Some of the things in our projects where I don't really know what it means to be an elderly person with 80+ years old, and I want to better understand the reality of these people, no? Following what Mitzi was just saying before. Or sometimes as well, there are many different projects working with people with reduced mobility. We want to make sure we prioritize our initiatives with our target groups, and that this is an additional thing that we're building and not repeating things that are already done. Or we want to test a lot of different hypotheses that we have and see if they hold, right? So I think it was really for us, as part of this user engagement plan with all the different pilot partners, something that was not so easy to answer. No, why do we actually need co-creation? So it's really important to clarify it as early on as part of the plan. And once you have it clarified, then it becomes much easier to move to the second part, which is what do you actually want to co-create? And here we've come up with something that we called the participation sandbox, which we use to think about what we can co-create and what we cannot co-create, what is negotiable and what is not negotiable. There are things that you will simply not be able to change as part of the way your project has been designed, right? Some of the ideas are, for example, the core idea of the project. If you've received funding to do certain things, sometimes it's very hard to deviate from the core main original idea. Sometimes it's about the geography. You have to do it within a certain city, within a certain regions, and so on. Sometimes it's also the budget, right? There's the parts about the budgets that we have that we can't promise something that we will never be able to deliver or to pay for. So those are some examples of things that are negotiable, right? But then there's many things as well that are negotiable that you can put in this participation sandbox, whether it's about certain design elements, some types of vehicles. We could also talk about communications and storyline. How do we talk about certain projects? There's so many things, but it's really important to define them, no, to bring clarity. So here I would like to ask, our different pilot partners here, and also Dr. Mindy to come back with us right after to talk about, in your projects, what are some of the things that were not negotiable, that were negotiable, just to have a bit of some insights about that. I don't know if Essen, you're the top picture, if you would like to start.
That picture was placed very strategically, I assume. I think the first example that I'm thinking about is also because Sarah is also here. You said, Sarah, like in the beginning, the feedstocks is very similar to MobiTwin, and at first sight, it sounds like the perfect opportunity to fuse the two services. That's also what we thought at Impact in the city of Mechelen. We were like, okay, we are reaching the same people. The concept is the same, so it should work. And then we didn't do co-creation then, but because we didn't do co-creation in the latter phase of that pilot, we realized that even though we are trying to reach the same people and we have the same kind of format within our services, we realized that there's also a difference in, for example, the access to service regarding requirements to become a member of a service. The MobiTwin services, for example, it's a non-governmental service, but we have some requirements that people need to fill before they can become members, while the rickshaw service is often more grassroots, more flexible, more bottom up. And there we saw that the things that we thought could be negotiable were actually non-negotiable. For example, the fee to become a member of MobiTwin, or the voluntary fees that the volunteers get from the rickshaw service that are different from the voluntary fees that the voluntary drivers of MobiTwin get, because that is a more regulated fee, while the rickshaw service is not a regulated fee in the city that we were testing. So that was something that we discovered, for example, that you assume that things are negotiable, but when you get in the operational phase of a pilot, you realize that that's not negotiable. And that could have been, for example, avoided if we did co-creation in the first hand. So I assume that's kind of an example that could fit in this participation sandbox that we're talking about.
Interesting, yes, and also to see this perspective of things you thought were non-negotiables actually became negotiables, and vice versa. And interesting. Maybe let's move to Sar, to stay in Belgium as well, because you also made a connection to the project of Sar. If you would like to share your views on the participation sandbox.
Yeah, and I think it's very important, this exercise. It really helped us to delineate what is negotiable and what isn't. And we found out that we have like 3 non-negotiable pillars of our service, which are PRM, people with reduced mobility, our end users, it's non-negotiable because we got the question a lot, why don't you drive tourists or other more mobile people, let's say, but then that's not the core of our idea. This is really a service for people with reduced mobility. On the other hand, it is a sustainable mode of transport. It's very important, and it will stay like this. The average distance of our rides is 2.5 kilometers. So we really think that it's important to use a sustainable mode of transport. What mode? We could discuss this, but now it's bikes. Maybe later on, if there are other types manufactured, it could change, but it's really important that it's sustainable. And the third one is the volunteers. Our drivers are volunteers. We don't have enough budget to have paid people driving these bikes. Then also it becomes more like a taxi service. So these are like the three pillars to us that are non-negotiable. But then you have all the rest that is. For example, we with our volunteers, we talk about the bikes. Are these good bikes? What is good? What is wrong? About the area, about the booking system, and all these things we really discuss with our end users, with our volunteers, just to improve the service.
Great. It seems like you have made it very clear, right? And I feel like once you know what is not negotiable and make it very clear, then it becomes easier to think about the aspects that you can actually negotiate and therefore integrate as part of your co-creation. Thanks, Sar. Waza, I hope I pronounced it better. May I ask you a few of your views on your side?
Yes, of course. In our project, we want to, well, for me now, when I'm talking to you, I wanted to focus more on what we find negotiable in our project, which is maybe a bit smaller than the other ones. But just for you to understand a bit more, we first wanted to co-identify the needs of two different groups. So the first group is the elderly. And within that large group, we wanted to focus on the seniors that are more active, that don't have that many disabilities or, reduced mobility, more easier to move around in the city. And the second group is people with reduced mobility. So we wanted to co-identify with them. And then we also wanted their help in choosing what adapted vehicles they were interested in, and also would be willing to try in our pilot. So that's something that they most definitely can influence for us. And then going forward, we want their help to evaluate and give us insights, what they thought about the vehicles, and maybe also how we can proceed, because that's not like fixed. I mean, we have a structure in which we can put the vehicles, maybe, but that's still something that we're trying to find a solution for. So that's also an aspect that we want them to help us and think in new ways. So yeah, that's from me.
Thank you, Asa. I think what I found interesting in Varberg is that you focused first a lot on the vehicles and the design of the vehicles, and now you're looking more at like, how do we provide those vehicles now to the target groups? No, so you really divided it into those two different phases of negotiables. Great. And then maybe finishing with Mitzi, I think you had interesting points on promises, right? That's a bit what this part sort of helps to clarify.
We've talked about the things you should do, and these are all really good examples of doing it well. But I've seen it go another way. And so Sami kind of hinted at it. What you absolutely must not do is come in with a hidden agenda. So we plan to do this, and we need to show that people with reduced mobility like it, and we're going to basically do a fake co-creation to make them feel like it's their idea. And yes, I've seen that, and it really is not okay. So make sure what you plan will really be co-creation. It's a word that a lot of disability groups are starting to get kind of tired of because it's sometimes being used as a substitute for consultation. And I've heard people saying, oh God, not another co-creation event, because they never really listen. So in co-creation, you, the department or the service, it's actually going to deliver the thing that you're meant to be co-creating. You've got to first talk through those parameters, the things that are not negotiable, the things that are negotiable, and you have to really be willing to shape the thing in accordance with what you learn, which means you need to take your co-creation partners' words and preferences into the same, just as equal as your own. And I can give you an example from a project that I worked on where it really didn't work that way. And I wish that it had. This was a large national project where we involved a lot of autistic people, and we had committees meeting to talk using co-creation tools on a whole bunch of different topics. So priority setting and then priority setting within these topics. And at the end of it, we had an evaluation, and most of the autistic people involved said, we sat on those committees and we gave our opinions, but what came out at the end didn't really resemble the things that we kept arguing for. Because all these professionals who were sitting there with us, their opinions were taken more seriously, and we felt a bit used. And I recognized that because I had seen it happening and I'd been kind of calling it out, and other people had called it out. But there is that tendency to charge forward with the thing that you think is most important as a professional. So, of course, after that evaluation, we went back and we looked again at how can we make sure that people are equally heard in a co-creation process. And you'll be including people from a lot of different disciplines, chances are. You mentioned the rickshaw drivers, right? They have their own priorities. The writers have their priorities. The city, the program itself has them, and balancing those is hard. So if you've defined what's negotiable, you then have to decide whose views are going to predominate if there are conflicts, and how do you work through that?
It's a very good point, Mizia. And I would say, from what I see, it's not really something as well that you think about so much. No, I assume these sad results that you mentioned, sometimes as well, sometimes it's planned and sometimes it just happens, right? I mean, what I'm trying to say here is, in many places, we did not think about how much power a certain stakeholder in your co-creation actually holds. No, you're just bringing different people together and trying to understand how to steer the project one direction or another. But actually, the actual power, decision-making of those stakeholders is not something, at least within our project, we've discussed so much, because I think that we also, through the process, just try to understand the direction rather than making a decision. So it's very interesting points and perspectives you're bringing here. Which maybe then brings us to the second part, also to progress in the plan. Identify your partners. I think that makes the perfect link to it. And here we divided it within our plan into two different views. Let's say one is the end users, so the people that will actually be the recipient of your projects. They can be the ones that will benefit from the mobility service. They can also be the volunteers to some extent in the aspect of the project of SAR and the FITS taxi. And then there's the stakeholders you're working with, right? Are you working with different NGOs? Are you working with a company? Are you working with the Public Transport Authority? There's a lot of different stakeholders and organizations that will also take part in your co-creation process. First things to say here, and I think we hinted it a little bit before, is there's such a diversity in personas and in end users, right? Look at elderly people. There's so many different ways we can talk about elderly people. Now, there's elderly people that are 65, some that are 90. There are some that have a mobility impairment, some that don't have. So there's already a complexity in what we're trying to do to really understand how to narrow down and understand the different needs of all those kinds of personas and people. Everyone has unique needs based on their sets of characteristics and being. But I think it is important to understand as much as possible your end users. No? So it's really up to you to identify them, identify who they are, try to put names on them, try to better understand their mobility patterns and their needs and the interest that they would have in the pilots. And I think it was something we said at the beginning, you will make a lot of hypotheses, most of them which may be wrong. And I think as part of your co-creation, it is important that you improve your understanding of those end users and those stakeholders. No, this is a dynamic, everything that we're showing you now is very dynamic. No, it has to change. I would say if it stays as it is from the beginning of your project until the end, then there's a problem, right, in your co-creation. So it's really important that you learn as much as possible throughout this. And this plan is just something to help you go through it. No, here's a little bit of an example of the project in Varberg and Driva, where they were trying to understand a bit more who their end users are and what is their mobility needs, who they are actually targeting at the moment with their project. And then the second thing is the stakeholders, so the different organizations you're going to work with and analyze them. I think this is also often something we underestimate, especially a part of the risk management, how important this stakeholder is. And this goes back as well, maybe to what Dr. Midziol was saying before, what's the power of these organizations over the pilots, over the project that we have. And I'll give you one example here. One of the pilots we had in the small project, we actually underestimated the risk management of a housing provider. And therefore the integration of this partner in the co-creation process was maybe less important than what we thought it should be. And later on, when some challenges and difficulties appeared in the project, the housing provider actually decided to pull off, like to stop the pilot project, which is something that no one had actually foreseen would happen. And instead of looking for solutions collectively to the problem, they simply decided to stop. And I think if we had actually analyzed a bit better the risk management and how important the stakeholder was, we would have been able to have a much different results and be able to actually carry on these pilot projects and overcome the challenges. So my next question maybe on those sort of recruiting the end users and the stakeholders is how do you decide on who to recruit in your co-creation process? Now, we said there's a lot of different organizations and people. It's a complex process. So how and the co-creation process you're about to have very much depends on its participants, right? So how do you actually decide them as early on as part of the preparation of your project? Maybe we can start again with you, Mitzi.
I've got a lot to say about this one, so you may have to cut me off. I'm going to talk about the service users, and I think other people will be able to talk more about some of the other stakeholders. Unfortunately, there's a tendency to take the really easy route with recruitment, which is you work with the usual suspects. These are those people who show up at every public meeting, and there may be leaders within an organization. And I will say a lot of these people are fantastic resources, and one of the great places to use them is to meet with them and ask them to help you find a diverse group of participants. So instead of them maybe being your participant, help me find somebody. In the disability world, you really want to reach out to disabled people's organizations. These are organizations run by disabled people, not organizations run for disabled people. In the Netherlands, for example, we have an organization called Interreg. They're a national network and they advocate for the needs of disabled people. They do a lot of great work. They will be super useful for putting a call for participants in their newsletter or on their website. But there are also DPOs that are run by and for people with mobility impairments. And those organizations tend to reach more into the grassroots, so less of the usual suspects. You also need to find people who aren't represented by any organization. Most organizations, DPOs and the other kind, they tend to trend kind of middle class and white and more able. So you need people from ethnic minority groups, people with migration background, poor people, working class people, and people who live in some form of institutional care, like in a group home. These are actually the people who need accessible transport options the most, right? They're the ones who can't afford the alternative, like owning a car or taking taxis. They don't even know people who own cars. So they really need your service. I'll give you an example of how I did this on a project. I had a project working with autistic women about their healthcare access. And I always keep notes of people that I meet at meetings. And I had met someone who was an autistic woman who was a photographer, and she was photographing a meeting. She mentioned she was really active on Twitter. And so I don't use Twitter anymore, but back then I did. And I added her to my kind of Twitter feed, and I noticed she had a lot of conversations going. So when this project started, I reached out to her and I said, I'm really interested in trying to find Black and minority ethnic women and working class women to take part in this project, and they're not coming to me through my usual channels. Do you know anyone? And she's like, if you can pay me, I will find them. And so we added her as a co-researcher, and she did such a great job. I now have actually more people than I could ever use for the project. It was a very diverse sample. The only thing that was missing was enough men, which is a bit of a problem. But we worked that out because we wanted to compare men and women, of course. So that was a really good way to work. It wasn't so much that she was going to be part of my sample, but she knew how to help me find people that I never would have found otherwise. For people using residential care services, they're often a really hard group to find, but they're super important for the work you're doing. You usually have to go through staff, but I have found that the bigger organizations that run day centers, which are places where people with disabilities spend their day doing an activity, and also the people who manage group homes, they really have some very forward-looking staff. You just need to kind of cultivate those connections, and we do it even before you're starting to think of your project. For seniors only buildings are a great resource because they're all together. I happen to live in one of these. I might look like I'm too young for it. I'm older than you think. And we've got a whole building with people who range from in their 50s to 100. And we have a meeting room and we have a bulletin board. And these are people who normally are not involved in any kind of organized consultation with the city council or anything. And yet we're an underused resource. To get in, I think unless you know someone, feel free to call me if you're in our area. You probably have to go to the building manager, but it's not really a hard thing to get a flyer put up and to get use of the facilities even. They're very happy to host it. We do have a variety of co-creation events that have happened in that building, but often not with our residents, just because, hey, it's a meeting room in the neighborhood. So I think they're missing out. I do also want you to make sure that you involve people who ask awkward questions. Yeah. And I'm going to give you a real world example here. There's a guy called Larry Arnold. I've worked with Larry for years, so he never minds me mentioning him. He's a former PhD student of mine who's also an autistic man, and he has really strong views, and he is not shy about telling you what he thinks. And that's not always fun to work with if you like a quiet life. But having him involved in research alongside other people, he's helped me with recruitment, he's helped me with putting together events, and he's always in the middle of it and always a loud voice. It emboldens other people in the group to be more critical and to ask, why have we always done things this way when that's what comes up? And to call out injustice and be the one willing to press for meaningful change. He ended up being the first autistic board member of the National Autistic Society in Britain. That's one of the first autistic people to ever serve on the board of one of these organizations that was started by parents. He was such, if you don't mind me swearing, a pain in the ass. He questioned everything and he made a massive difference. And I think every co-creation project needs a Larry or maybe two. Finally, one last thing is that relationship management is a really crucial part of your preparation for co-creation when you're recruiting. Don't contact people and get their agreement to participate and then just leave them hanging for 6 months while you finalize your grant. You'll lose good participants that way, and it can damage your reputation among people. They'll start saying, yeah, they contacted me and then they never got back to me. And then I get an email inviting me to a meeting next week. So have some planned outreach events during your recruitment process where these future participants, these people you hope to attach, are invited. And it can be just a coffee and cookies and let's talk about where we are with the project, or send out a regular newsletter, or ask an intern to interview these people who've come forward and said they might participate to share their stories about their need for accessible transport options, which gives you some data to work with already. That's just consultation, but it's also getting the stories in, and those stories can be quite powerful to you in maybe securing that extra little bit of funding that you need to make it real. So keep in touch with all these people who are coming forward as you're still recruiting. Don't just leave them on a list. And now I'm going to let some other people have something to say.
Thank you very much, Mitzi. And yeah, it is indeed important to maintain relationships. There's the section number 4 exactly on this that we can come back to. And very interesting to hear some creative and practical ways of recruiting diverse groups of people. I think you often picture just a municipality putting a message on LinkedIn and waiting for answers there. Here you see actually a lot of different ways of doing it through your talk. So thanks for that. Let's go back maybe then to Waza, Sar, SN. Could you share us briefly maybe just a few ways in which you've been recruiting for your co-creation process, just to hear a bit from your practical experience in your pilots? I don't know who wants to start. First person to unmute.
I'm
Sar.
first. I think what Mitzi said about the personal contact for us is very important. We are in touch with our, for example, with our volunteers a lot. We see them on a daily basis, but we notice when we organize co-creation sessions that the people who are really loud voices, let's say, they will participate, and so we always make an effort to get other people in these sessions, and we do it by just phoning them, texting them to ask if they could join us. We have, for example, as I told you, a lot of refugees, newcomers, and we have a WhatsApp group with all the members, all the volunteers, and they are not contacting us a lot, so we find it very important. We see that just texting them personally really helps them to get over this barrier to join us. So that's one thing I was thinking about, and the other thing. We use co-creation to improve our service, and so with our end users we organized interviews just to improve our service and to know what end users think of our service. And it was very nice because it was done by a university student. He is specialized in data, and he interviewed 80 persons and to have a proper sample. So he didn't only phone, for example, the people who are like really fond of us, really fans of the first hour, let's say, but also he made like a very nice sample of people who already stopped using our service, and that is key for us to know what is going well, what is going wrong, but also what's the impact of our service, of the social impact of our service. So yeah, those were just two things I was thinking about.
Thank you so much, Sar. Who's next?
I can go next. Well, for us, since we're working with 2 different groups, it was also very different how we went about to recruit. And regarding our PRMs, it was easy as we already have an established contact point with an existing umbrella organization. And this umbrella organization represents about 26 different PRM organizations in our city. So we simply ask them if they have any members from any of these organizations that want to join us and to be a part in our project. And they always answer very quickly, and there's always many people who want to join. But then when it comes to our active seniors, it was more difficult because so we had to start by looking for existing contacts, either that the municipality already have with seniors or where seniors already meet. So when we finally found an existing context, we asked them if we could join one of their happenings to both to tell about our project and also to kind of start to co-create together. And I was thinking about what Mitzi said, and in this group, we definitely have our own Larry questioning everything, which is really good.
Wonderful. I think Larry will be very happy to watch this webinar, I hope. Essen, would you like to complete the round with your...
Yes. I think with Impact, we are very lucky with the MobiTwin service. That's actually, we are the umbrella organization. So with MobiTwin, we provide the platform, but it's the local authorities that actually operate the service. So we are lucky that we have that direct contact with, I think, over 240 municipalities in Belgium overall. So the first step for us was actually to just realize and take a step back and decide on the fact that we don't know that much about our end users and volunteers. Like we can do assumptions, but that was a big mind shift, I think, from our side, just to make sure that we have to come out of our bubbles. Okay, we do have so many municipalities, but it's the municipalities themselves who have the direct contact with volunteers and with members. It's not us. So that was for us an advantage. A disadvantage turned into an advantage through co-creation, because we made sure that the members, who are often also elderly people, that we can actually reach out to them through our local desks, through our local MobiTwin desks, who already have this personal or this trust relationship with members. And trust is a very important aspect for people to actually say yes to something. But again, also to come back to what Dr. Waltz just said about, don't give people the feeling that they are being used. So we also have to think about, okay, we have to make sure that when they are spending time on this, on our project, we have to make sure that they get something also in return. So we really decided to take it step by step to see okay, first let's pass by the local MobiTwin desks, and then we decide on who reacts on it, who has the time to actually be involved in the pilot project, and who are actually eager to work with us to actually reach out to their community. So this way we came to two MobiTwin desks, one in a more urban area and one in a more rural area, which was for us also a very big advantage to see what the rural and the urban link is of this MobiTwin service that we have. We already see a big impact, but we also have to make sure that we get the right insights to see how it differentiates from each other. So just making sure that we take things step by step, that we involve the right people, that we have in our own community or own network, and then make sure that we find out the right methodologies to reach out. If it's a phone call that we need to do, then we'll do a phone call. If it's we passing by or we going to the homes of our members just because they are not able to come out, or they don't want to have a phone conversation, or they just want to see who this person is actually that is trying to reach out to them, then we have to make sure that we are flexible enough to do that. So it was mainly making sure that we get an overview of what do we already have and what do we not have, and who can we ask for help for the things that we don't.
Interesting. Thank you very much. That makes also a very good link on how do we reach out to those people and how do we engage them. I think that's sort of leads us to this next part, which is preparing your engagements and thinking about your timeline and how do you actually doing it. I'm going to give the floor actually to our second facilitator, Maite, to continue this process with a bit of a challenge from a time perspective. Let's try to finish the next sections maybe within the next 10 minutes so that we can at least allow one questions from the audience if we have one before finishing this webinar. So Maite, the floor is yours.
Yes, I will try to speed up things a little bit, but I think a lot of interesting insights were already shared that will also link to the three next steps that I will discuss. So the third step in our user engagement plan is to plan your co-creation process. Yeah, you will see that we will use co-creation process or user engagement through each other, but it refers to the same. But when you go to the next slide, Sami, so we try to force our partners a little bit to create their own timeline in which they think about the phases when they will do the co-identification, co-development, co-implementation, co-evaluation, and at the end also the co-dissemination. And they structured this around three main periods within the timeline, which is the pre-pilot phase, the pilot phase, and then also the post-pilot phase. So the pilot phase is the phase in which the pilot is actually implemented. Yeah, and then over this whole timeline with the different phases, they also plan their user engagement events. So you can go to the next slide, please. And for the user engagement activities, we created an overview of co-creation activities that are interesting to adopt for our specific target groups. But is this an overview that is not limited? These co-creation activities are also included in the user engagement plan. So what we try to do with all these activities is to give some inspiration of possible activities and other activities than only doing a simple focus group, but also to be more creative, to really think about your specific target group, are it end users or other stakeholders, for example, and at which phase of the whole co-creation process do you want to do this type of activity. So these are several things that we took into account when we worked on the user engagement events toolbox, let's say. Of course, we will come back to this as well, but these co-creation activities require certain resources that you should not underestimate. This is also very important. These depend on the type of activity, and this is something that we also try to include within these cards. Then when we go to the next slide, we see here two examples of user engagement events that were done within the small project. And we also believe that it's very important that when you organize a user engagement event, that you also keep track of what you did or the insights that you gathered in some kind of template where you can that you can use to plan your event, but also to collect the key insights and, for example, some pictures. That is what we did here. And then we use this information to create an overview of these user engagement events on our website, where on the one hand, our own partners can go to and check what has already been done to get some inspiration, but it's also used by externals to see, okay, what type of co-creation activities are possible or are interesting to do. So that's a bit the idea here, and it's also very interesting throughout the whole co-creation plan or throughout the whole timeline that you can keep track of all the activities that you did, and then more important, even all the key insights that came out of these activities. Yes, you can go to the next slide. And here you can see one example of MobiTwin. It's not the objective that you can read what is on the timeline, but this is the timeline that they created for their pilot project. So what we try to do is to force our partners from in the beginning to plan the whole pilot process. Now here you can see that mainly activities were planned for the more the co-identification, co-development, co-implementation, and that there's still some work to do for the post-pilot phase. But by now, by seeing these timelines and the idea about behind the timeline, we hope it is clear that co-creation is not something additional, but that it should be fully integrated and also planned from the start of your project. I think that is one main thing that we want to make clear here. So therefore, you should try to plan the whole process from the beginning, and you can ask yourself the questions like, when do you want to implement your pilot? What are important milestones or deadlines in your project? These you can also indicate within the timeline. Or for example, what co-creation activities do you want to organize when, and even more important, with whom? There are also a lot of other questions that you can ask yourself when drafting these timelines. You can go to the next. So yeah, here you also see an example of the FEEDS taxi. So again, we see a lot of co-creation activities that already have been done or that are still planned, and that are also spread over the whole co-creation process. So it's not only in the beginning, not only in the identification and development phase, but also co-evaluation and co-dissemination are very important moments within your co-creation process. Yes. And then I think we come back to our speakers. So the next question for you is, how do you best choose and prepare an event for user engagement? Because we see that, for example, a clear structure and also a good communication method during the event are very important, but we are wondering how you do this within your co-creation events. Maybe Mitzi, we can start again with you.
I'll try to be really quick and just say a couple of things. The location and accessibility of the event mean a lot. So think that one through carefully. That's where your co-researcher can help. In most cases, you need a pretty clear structure in advance. So telling people what they need to bring, to prepare, to think about in advance. Don't assume that there's no preparation necessary. The professionals who attend will have been thinking about this stuff for weeks, and then that's where the power differential comes in. They're prepared, and other people haven't had time to think about it. So you might need to do some prep materials to give to people, thinking about your priorities, or here's more background information. Once you have a group together, you got to really keep those power differentials in mind. Unfortunately, disabled people and also women and children are often trained to comply with authority. So if you're putting them in a group with someone who they see as an authority figure or an expert, it can really shut the discussion down. They defer to that person. Oh, you think that? Well, it must be right. It makes sense sometimes to have separate discussions and then come together, like just the women, just the people taking care of kids, or to use timed turns so everyone has the same time to speak, or paired discussions where two people talk. That's a little less hierarchy. Even if there is a power differential between the two, it's only the two of you. It's good to work from small circles outward than having one of those come up to the mic if you have something to say moments, because it will be the usual suspects who come up to the mic. Keep your activities kind of short and focused, and think about ways to draw out people who are a little shyer. And then to say something really briefly about communication support, because you will be working sometimes with people who need more communication support than you might be used to. You can adapt a lot of these exercises, and the ideas they have are great, to use pre-written text or even emojis or icons for people who really struggle with writing or with speaking. And I can give you an example of that. There was a preferences exercise done with disabled children, severely disabled children who are nonverbal, for a short break service that I was involved with. And they used boxes that had like a happy face and the yuck face. And you had cards for all the activities, and they just asked the kids to sort them: happy face, yuck face. Very simple. You can do this when you're working even with very young kids and with people who really struggle with communicating. I think I'll leave it there because I want to hear from other people too.
Okay, maybe any of the other speakers who want to quickly add something very brief and summarized.
I think if I may, or Oja, if you want to go.
You can go first.
Okay. What I wanted to add was like it really also depends on the phase of the co-creation or the co-creation phase that you are in, and the purpose of your event. You really have to make sure that like you know who you are inviting and why you are inviting those people. And I can speak of one experience where we were so eager on, you know, the content of the event, that we wanted to make sure that it's accessible, that people understand what's going on, that there are discussions going on. But and this is something that we are not very proud of, but we apparently not thought through enough about like how we would organize the location of the event. Not the location itself was accessible, but how we would like organize the chairs, how we would organize the posters that we were hanging. For example, when you have people who are using wheelchairs, you can't hang those posters too high. You have to make sure that the posters hang lower. like such small details. Even though we were so eager on making sure that the event was accessible, we still made those little mistakes, communication mistakes that we only realized at the moment itself. So that was really an eye-opening thing. So you can prepare as much as you want, just making the, again, to come back to what Dr. Wall said, like make sure that also in your preparation, you have someone from the end users who can give you advice on these blind spots that you will come, like they will happen. For sure they will happen. So we have to make it an automatic thing that we involve those end users also in the preparation, one way or another.
Thank you, Essen. Ilse?
Yes. Well, for us, when we chose the location, it was really important that we come to them where they already feel comfortable and where we also already know that they will be able to access the location. And I also agree with Ethan that you have to prepare a suitable material, because we decided that they were going to work in small groups, so we had to prepare maps and different pictures and just material to work with when they were trying to answer our questions. So just a small tip.
Thank you. I don't know, Sarah, if you have something else, something different you want
A
to...
very small thing just to add, make sure that it is clear what you are going to do with what comes out of these events, because we already did some sessions with our volunteers, and then you gather a lot of information, a lot of good ideas, but you have to communicate what you are going to do, that you can't do all in the near future. So really make sure that they don't get disappointed because things aren't changing that fast, or you're not handling it that fast.
I think this is a very good bridge to the next step in our user engagement plan. So we can go to step 4, maintaining a relationship with your end users and your partners. I think a lot of this step has already been discussed in the previous steps, because it's very naturally to already think about this 4th step in the first 3 steps. So you can go to the next slide, Sunny. But very briefly, also in co-creation, it was already mentioned, when you want to co-create, it's also very important to stay in touch and to maintain that relationship with your end users and your stakeholders. And I think Mitzi mentioned the example that you cannot expect someone to show up after a few months without any contact. So that's also what we saw in one of our own pilots, I think. But keep in touch with all people, and also choose for a method or a communication method that works with your specific group you want to stay in touch with. I think that's what was already discussed during the webinar. Then we can directly go to you will skip this part of with our partners, and we can directly go to the 5th and final step, the planning of the resources. And here we do not only think of the financial resources, we already heard it a few times, like the budget, hire someone, also make sure that you have some resources to do co-creation, but also the human or more time-wise resources. These are 2 very important points in the co-creation process. So we can go to the next slide, please. So first of all, we try to identify within Small what a good co-creation leader, or maybe even better, leaders should look like, and the skills that we identified, or that were identified by our own Small partners, were that a co-creation leader should be someone who is very responsible, who is a good storyteller, who is flexible, who is open-minded, interested, a good listener. So these are some of the experiences of our own Small partners about the skills that one, or maybe even better, 2 or more persons should have. And then the final step of the user engagement plan are the financial resources. So it was mentioned a few times. It is very important that before you start your project, or before you start your co-creation process, that you also take into account a certain co-creation budget. And some of the things that can be included in this budget are, for example, a budget for NGOs, for equipment or experiment, time and staff costs. Very important, because it takes some time to do co-creation activities and to do the whole co-creation process, but also for communication and budget for the participants in your co-creation. And here I come back to hiring someone that is part of your end users to be the critical friend within your co-creation process can be very valuable and very interesting. And I think by this we have come to the end of the user engagement plan. So these are the 5 steps that you will find in user engagement plans and that we think are very important to think about. So by now you know how to scope your co-creation process, you know how to identify your partners, to prepare your engagement, and how to maintain relationships and to plan your co-creation resources. So this means that you're now actually ready to start your own co-creation process. And before we will finish the webinar and the main takeaways, we first want to ask you if someone has a question. Maybe we have time for 1 or 2 questions to one of the speakers or to me or Sami. So if you have a question, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Or use the chat as well.
Or
We'll
use
use
the
that.
chat.
Yeah. I was also checking the participants. It's good to see that most of all of you have stayed during the whole webinar. So let's see if we have one interesting questions or two about everything that you've heard now before we wrap up and we all go for a good lunch.
No questions. It was all so clear.
Then maybe in the meantime, if there's one question popping up, we wanted to actually finish and sort of wrap up with all of you. The speakers a bit on the reality check, just to have some fresh ideas. Once you've done a plan, what's the practice looking like, right? So final question to sort of like wrap up everything is, when can cooperation can be seen as a successful process, and how can a good preparation, maybe with a tool like the user engagement plan, help? So once you've done this entire, let's say, preparation exercise, how can you make sure that you're going through this whole process in the best way possible? So maybe let's wrap up with that, if there's no question from now from the audience to finish this webinar. Who would like to start?
You have
And
1 minute per speaker.
1 minute. Perfect. Thanks, Maite.
I'm going to be super fast. It's a real success if your service or your program actually results in greater access to activities of daily living for people who have mobility impairments. If that happens, you've done something right. And it's even better if your work results in some kind of like institutionalized long-term involvement with the service users group, because then co-creation just becomes part of an ongoing relationship that centers those end users, and the gains just keep building, and maybe we don't even have to call it co-creation anymore. It's just how we work.
Very good point. I love that one. Thank you very much, Mitzi. Esen, I think you're next.
You go. Yeah, okay. I'll also keep it very short. To me, is something also again a perspective change, but the moment that stakeholders or organizers or providers or local authorities stop looking for answers and start asking the right questions to the right people. I think that is a very, from that moment on, when we realize that local authorities or operators start asking the right questions, I think co-creation has been successful.
Very good point as well. Sar or Weza? I think Azai next.
Yeah, I can go. Well, in our organization, it sometimes feels that we're a bit, there's a gap between us in the municipality and the public or different groups. So for me, I feel that every time we just create a co-creation activity and actually meet other people, it's kind of a success. And that many of my colleagues are maybe a bit afraid to do it because they don't know how. So to use these kind of plans, I think that would create maybe that they feel more safe to actually reach out and do it. So I just do it. That's the best advice, I think.
Normalizing it and getting also other colleagues from your own team municipality that are not used to it. It's a good point. Yeah. And Sarah, would you like to have the final words?
Wow. It's maybe a bit a cliche, but it really helps. I think this whole exercise really helped us to zoom out and to start a timeline and different phases and that you stick to a plan. And we see that in a humble way, we can see that it is successful. I will end with an example. We have an end user, Lucas he is called. He is a wheelchair. He is in a wheelchair, and he started using our service, and he evolved in being one of our team. Let's say he works now 1 day a week at our office, and he comes up with ideas like, for example, how we should do a workshop on how to communicate with the end users, because I feel like because of my perspective as end user, sometimes we are being a bit patronized. People don't really know how to communicate with me, and so that's really, then you reached your goal, because Lucas is really trying to change some things in the volunteers, and he comes up with ideas, and then I think we're on a good way with the co-creation.
Great. It feels like we're ending with the first point we started the webinar with Mitzi mentioning, let's hire people as co-researcher. No, it feels like that's what you have as well now as part of your project. So it's closing the whole loop of this webinar very well. Thank you so much to all of you for your really relevant insights on going through this entire user engagement plan. Yeah, I've learned a lot with all of you, and I hope the conversation was also useful for you, the speakers, and for you as well in the audience. Oh, we have some final faces popping up. There you go. Like I said before, you will be able to download and find all the information related to this user engagement plan on our website. And you can always get in touch with us if you have any more questions about it. You will also have the contact details in the next slides of all the different speakers. And yeah, I hope that we can at least be a bit useful in your co-creation journey and how you're preparing it for your upcoming projects. And for now, I'm wishing you a very good lunch. It is right on time, 1 p.m. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a good time and a good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.